proposal to defund Obamacare. Now, some conservatives believe that would be a good thing. Others say any attempt to deny money to the new law would hurt the Republican Party because the government would shut down. Joining us now from Austin, Texas, Republican strategist Karl Rove. And you say?
Well, first of all, let's stipulate that everybody on the Republican side wants to end Obamacare. It is a terrible law. It's going to drive the deficit sky high. It's going to hurt American families. It's going to deny them access to quality health care. It's going to cause employers to drop their coverage and people to lose their jobs and their paychecks. So let's stipulate right from the beginning, everybody on the Republican side agrees, let's get rid of the law. The question is, tactically, how do you do that? And there is a disagreement about that. It all circles around the issue of the continuing resolution. At the end of September, the fiscal year will end, and the government, the budget for fiscal year 13 ends, and you have to begin funding it under a new budget year. The budget won't be in place at that time, and so there'll have to be what's called a continuing resolution to fund the government. There's already going to be a battle over the size of that. Democrats want to spend more than the budget agreement calls for. Republicans want to keep it lower at the budget, the agreement at the level agreed to in July of 2011. And then Senator Lee and several of his colleagues have a further recommendation, which is not to have any funding at all for the Obamacare law in it. I think there are three problems with that. One is, first of all, is that most of Obamacare is unaffected by such a maneuver. Most of Obamacare, about 99% of it, from here forward, is mandatory spending, and the continuing resolution will only affect the discretionary budget. Out of the $1.5 trillion cost of Obamacare, the Congressional Budget Office says this will affect less than $10 billion of spending. Second of all is that, unlike in 1995, there's no funding for the government in place. In 1995, when we had a shutdown of the government, the Republican Congress had already passed and the president had signed funding for half of the cost of all of the government and 100% of the cost of defense. There is no funding bill in place now. So what would happen if this were to pass is that literally the first week of October, there'd be no paychecks for the people in the military, no paychecks for the FBI, no paychecks for the Border Patrol, because we haven't funded any of the government, unlike 1995. And third, I think that this is a political loser. We saw how badly Republicans, the rule in Washington is, if it happens, if something bad happens, blame the Republicans. The Republicans
certainly if the government shut down, there was no money, that would go right on the GOP's head. But the talk radio guys are framing it this way. If you oppose Obamacare, you have a patriotic duty not to fund it. So you've got to sabotage it any way you can, or you're not a true conservative, or you're not standing up for your belief system. And that's the way it's being put out there.
Well, look, first of all, being conservative doesn't mean you do something that's going to blow up in your face. I believe we ought to find every useful way to oppose Obamacare. We ought to have hearings on its shortcomings. Senator Lee, whose father was a brilliant constitutional lawyer, Senator Lee is well positioned to lead an effort to challenge the president delaying the employer mandate for a year. Where did he get the legal authority to take a statute in the United States, and because it creates a political problem for him and undermines people's confidence in the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, where does the president get the right to delay the law for a year? We ought to have an attack on that. But the question is whether, while we're shooting, while we're in the foxhole and in the trenches shooting at the other guys, should we be taking grenades and throwing them, into our own trenches? And I think this is problematic. We saw what happened in 1995, and I repeat, in 1995, we had funded, the Republicans Congress had passed, and President Clinton had signed a bill to fund all of the military and to fund most of the rest of the government. We will go into October this year with zero funding. Now, let me say one other thing. Let's make it really technical. If this is going to only deny $10 billion in funding for Obamacare for next year, they have money in the budget this year that they can carry over and money that they can move around. So if you zero it out, they may not be able to spend all $10 billion they hope to spend. They may have to give up the billion-dollar ad campaign and the this and the that, but they'll have enough money to continue moving forward on this law, even if we're successful in doing this.
I'm going to ask Rand Paul tomorrow if he comes on about this as well. Mr. Rove, we appreciate your point of view. Thank you. In fact,